For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Isaac Newton. Hi everyone. Before we start the show, I'd like to thank iTrust Capital for being a sponsor. iTrust is a crypto and precious metals IRA. They offer a wide variety of crypto assets. There are no setup fees or monthly fees, and transactions are only 1%. The combined annual contribution limit for Roth and traditional IRAs is $6,000 or $7,000 if you're age 50 or older for the 2021 and 2022 tax season. You're able to trade your assets on the iTrust platform 24/7, 365 days a year. iTrust uses state-of-the-art custodianship by Coinbase Custody and Fireblocks. If you use the link itrust.capital/Darren, you can get up to $100 in a funding reward just by using the link. So be sure to check them out.
To me, that's the biggest thing that happened today. So we have conflicts in the world. They used to be kinetic. We had nuclear war. We don't do that anymore. Now our weapons are financial weapons. And what we just did here is the equivalent of a financial nuclear weapon. We basically confiscated Putin's money, like hundreds of billions of dollars of it, right? And that sends a signal throughout the world.
It is unprecedented that a G20 nation has had their central bank sanctioned. Make no mistake about this, the currency wars that we are in have escalated. The US dollar is the reserve currency, meaning everyone on the planet needs dollars to participate in the global economy. The US has cut Russia off from the global economy. This is not the first or last time that we have used sanctions. Censoring nations from using dollars sends a message to the entire globe that their money is not safe.
Fearing for their safety, Israel launches a surprise strike on Iranian nuclear facilities using air raids and cyber warfare. Iran strikes back by closing the Strait of Hormuz with mines, blocking off over a third of the oil on the sea. They then launch intermediate-range missiles at Israel. War escalates in the Middle East. Oil prices have surged to $200 a barrel. Gold hits $2,500 an ounce. China's gold futures contracts are now controlling north of $176 billion worth of physical gold. Panic causes the euro to collapse in value. The president addresses the nation, declaring that the U.S. military will do whatever it takes to protect Israel and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The collapse in the euro is now leading to a loss of confidence in all paper currencies. Fear spreads throughout the international community that all major economies could sink into a Great Depression. This time, the world doubts the ability of the Fed and the European Central Bank to rescue the economy. The recession revealed how fragile America really is. Gold hits $3,000 an ounce. The Chinese stake is now worth $212 billion. The Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party meets to discuss their options. They're feeling the strain of the price hikes to oil, and given their current tension with the U.S., they have serious doubts in our economy and the dollar. From China's perspective, gold is the safest bet. Their gold futures contracts expire in a week, and they've decided they want to take possession of all 2,000 tons. Secret cables are sent to this Chinese embassy behind us, informing the diplomats of the decision. However, a CIA asset in Beijing learns of their plans. Immediately, the president, Treasury Secretary, CIA director, and Fed chairman gather to consider China's gold play. They know there isn't enough gold available in the markets to meet China's demand. They can't show their cards yet, but they start debating the options. China's secret web of hedge funds begins giving notice that they demand physical delivery for their gold futures contracts. Gold becomes difficult to obtain and hits $3,500 per ounce. China's stake is now worth $247 billion. Oil hits $300 a barrel as the conflict in the Middle East continues. More paper currencies collapse around the world, causing a global panic. Under direction from the White House, the Fed holds emergency meetings with COMEX. They oversee the gold futures contracts. COMEX uses its emergency powers to freeze gold at $3,500 per ounce, and as a direct strike to China's interests, bans physical deliveries of gold on the futures contracts. COMEX has the power to do this. China reacts to this decision by declaring it an act of financial warfare by the U.S. government. Markets are already fragile because of the situation in the Middle East, and major economies are on the brink of depression because of the oil price spike. The conflict between Iran and Israel is slowing down as the United Nations intervenes to expedite a ceasefire. But in China, the currency war is about to escalate dramatically. The Chinese leadership feels they are backed into a corner. They realize they can't dump their $1.2 trillion in U.S. treasuries because the president would freeze the market, and that would be mutually assured financial oblivion. But they do have another financial weapon of mass destruction on the table. Because as the currency wars were heating up with America, they weren't just stockpiling gold futures contracts. They also had their web of hedge funds take positions in a separate block of highly leveraged derivatives. Their sovereign wealth funds put $150 billion in play here, which is controlling $2.25 trillion worth of investments. Suspecting their original plan was compromised due to a security leak, China takes precautions to ensure this is kept quiet. Out of the blue, China orders this web of hedge funds to sell these secret holdings all at the same time. In one single day, they dump the equivalent of the entire GDP of India or Canada or Russia on Wall Street. An economic Pearl Harbor we never saw coming. Americans panic, the Dow plunges, our dollar is decimated. The contagion spreads to London, Tokyo, everywhere. There's a run on banks as everything starts collapsing. Trading is frozen on Wall Street. But China is not done. Thanks to Washington, D.C., they've tapped into our FedWire and Treasury auction network. So their hackers unleash a cyber warfare attack on the U.S. to disrupt our financial exchanges, bank transactions, the power grid, and the internet backbone.
Jim Rickards explains a war simulation that he discussed with high-ranking Pentagon and intelligence agencies. In this simulation, a war breaks out that increases the price of oil and gold. The Chinese decide to take delivery of their U.S. gold futures. The U.S. doesn't make good on this agreement, essentially ripping them off. China counteracts by dumping all U.S. derivatives on the open market, causing a complete market meltdown. This is not some fantasy. China owns $1,068 billion in just U.S. Treasury holdings, the second largest U.S. debt holding. This is leverage.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on Friday the U.S. should formally recognize Taiwan as a country. Pompeo's comments made during an unofficial visit to Taipei cross a sensitive red line for China. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory and has never renounced the use of force to bring it under Chinese control.
While the United States should continue to engage the People's Republic of China as a sovereign government, America's diplomatic recognition of the 23 million freedom-loving Taiwanese people and its legal, democratically elected government can no longer be ignored, avoided, or treated as secondary.
On Thursday, Pompeo met Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, who bestowed a presidential honor on him. Tsai thanked him for his long-time support for Taiwan, but China's government has lambasted Pompeo's record as despicable. And hours after his Friday remarks, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said, quote, "Pompeo is a former politician whose credibility has long gone bankrupt. Such a person's babbling nonsense will have no success." Beijing put sanctions on him and 27 other top Trump-era officials when President Joe Biden took office in January 2021. China has stepped up its military and diplomatic pressure against Taiwan over the past 2 years. Taiwan's democratically elected government says it wants peace, but will defend itself if attacked. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the island has been on edge, wary of Beijing taking advantage of a distracted West to move against it.
We are currently in a currency war, a trade war, and a technological Cold War with China. China has not stopped trade with Russia. Barley and consumer goods have continued to flow between China and Russia along the China-Europe rail lines, despite major shipping and air freight being severely sanctioned. This is the first time the Shandong province has imported Russian barley through the China-Europe trains, the local government said.
Well, China will not take part in the unprecedented Western sanctions against Russia over the invasion of Ukraine. The head of the Chinese Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission spoke at a news conference today. He said, "We will not participate in such sanctions, and we will continue to maintain normal economic trade and financial exchanges with relevant parties." He added, China disapproves of the financial sanctions, particularly those launched unilaterally. Hello. He said they don't have much in legal basis and will not have good effects. So far, China's refused to condemn Russia for its invasion or even call the invasion an invasion.
The U.S. has been following the same playbook. You get out of line and you're cut off from the global economy. Everyone knows the consequences that are involved. I believe that countries susceptible to sanctions have been preparing. The digital yuan, SIPs, the Chinese version of SWIFT, SPFS, the Russian version of SWIFT is positioning. It is naive to think that countries will allow their economies to get crushed by sanctions. The Russian economy is in a hyperinflationary state due to sanctions. What happens if other countries continue to trade with Russia and the U.S. sanctions those countries? The scenario similar to Jim Rickards' scenario may evolve from these actions. For every action, there's a reaction.
Issue of sovereignty. Right from the beginning, the notion of what goes on in our borders is our issue. And then, of course, there's the issue which Henry could speak to about, there's one China, Taiwan is part of China, and what that represents. For example, they're very much conscious of the 100 years of humiliation, as they call it. When in around 1840, there was the foreign powers that came in and the Opium Wars and Taiwan. I think it was about 1895 that Japan, as one of the foreign powers, takes Taiwan. Those things are existential issues. And I think it's very important to be able to see things from not only China's perspective, but also for them to see it from America's perspective and to realize that if there is a war, a military war, it will be the worst war we've ever had because the technologies have advanced, and to be able to deal with that well. So I guess there's a lot to talk about in terms of China. I would emphasize the importance of avoiding the wars. And there are 5 types of wars, right? And they get progressively more difficult. There's a trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical influence war, a capital war, and a military war. And they all can go together. So anyway, I'll turn that over to Henry because
Belarus, which borders both Russia and Ukraine, has begun process of disconnecting its own financial systems from the SWIFT network, connecting them instead to the Russian system for transfer of financial messaging, which is also their SWIFT messaging system alternative. According to Russian briefings, plans were afoot to integrate SPF's network with China's homegrown payment system, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, or CIPS, which Beijing may now aggressively push on a global scale. Among 332 participants of the system, MUFG, Agricole, SEB Bank, and Toyota Bank, despite numerous calls from China to jointly reject the use of the US dollar, only the Bank of China joined the Russian central bank system. It's interesting to note that those banks are RippleNet partners.
This story came out. You saw a number of people rush to say, look, the Chinese are cutting off the Russians. Well, then you read in the story, it says the Chinese are actually still providing yuan-based financing, letters of credit, for Russian commodities. And you go, oh my gosh, that's huge. Because what that's telling you is that the Chinese are using this. Basically, the Americans have been fighting the transition away from the dollar for commodities forever. And here we actually have, by virtue of this crisis, the Americans are willingly pushing Russian commodity pricing to yuan. And the Chinese are saying, yeah, great, we'll take it. I checked in with a friend of mine who has decades of experience interacting with in energy markets, trading in energy markets around the world, very high level relationships around the world. And when I sent the article to him, he goes, I guarantee there are no limits on the amount of yuan deals that the Chinese banks will do. They are loving this. So when I say that this being their currency, this sort of indicates these indicate a type of leverage that is not being given any consideration in these Western media articles. This is, we can't sanction their energy because our own system will collapse. That's leverage.
The US and the EU excluded energy and derivatives in their sanctions. This means that if they were to sanction energy, it would become systemic and crash the entire global economy. China is buying oil from Russia and financing in yuan. That's demand taken away from dollars and euros and transferred to the yuan, making the yuan stronger. China is the second largest economy in the world. Like energy, if China was sanctioned, this would be systemic. China is the largest producer of manufactured products. What happens to the world if you can no longer purchase manufactured products from China? Now, if I know this, everyone else knows this, including China. This is leverage, and this is why I don't think China will stop trading with Russia.
On the standing in the economy, it says central bank sanctions could actually, quote, bankrupt the entire Russian banking system and push the ruble into worthlessness. How close are you to that?
Well, look, that's not our goal is not to impoverish the Russian people. What President Putin is doing is an act of war. He can never bring back the lives that will be lost. We always have the option to de-escalate our measures. Our efforts are a strategic choice, and we can change our strategic calculus at any moment, either through economic sanctions being removed, or by engaging in diplomacy and a peaceful resolution of this crisis. But that's a key difference. He's using brute physical force. We're making a set of strategic decisions that make this a failure for Putin.
The world becomes more fragmented, more divided. Money is moved to SIPs that uses the digital yuan, or Russian SWIFT system, the SPFS, and uses the Russian CBDC. This breaks up the dollar infrastructure. When peace is restored, there is more of a need for interoperability. Powell has recently spoke about two reserve currencies. The World Economic Forum and the IMF have also pushed for the ESDR to replace the reserve currency. This is why I think we see links between Russia, China, the IMF, and Ripple. I think they're preparing. I think the protocol for the ESDR is going to be on the XRP ledger. For this future to take place, the dollar needs to have a crisis. This is where a currency war fits in.
And that is, I think this is Putin's gambit, and I think this is the West's gambit, and it's a huge gambit. It's everybody's putting all their chips in, and the question is, can we move this energy outside of the SWIFT system? Because if you can, the U.S. will have just encouraged the death of the post-$71 system. Full stop. They will have cut the throat themselves of the post-$71 system. If they can't, it will reinforce the power of that system. But again, I think it's going to be so disruptive that, given the other leverage in the system, I think it's going to cause other problems. That the best case is that basically global central banks have to start printing money again because of disruption. So you're going to have this sort of, stagflation continue. I think that's the sort of the good outcome. Mm-hmm. And I think the bad outcome is, China steps up and goes, yeah, we'll buy it all. We'll take, and there's some logistical issues that's an oversimplification. There's pipeline issues. That's not to minimize those, because some of those are serious in terms of how much China can buy right away. But to the extent that there is a workaround that is created, or to the extent that there is a trump card that Russia plays, where Russia says, look, we're not selling it for anything other than rubles. Mm-hmm. And now the Americans and the Europeans have to sell dollars and sell euros to buy rubles. Their dependence on energy will force them to defend the ruble for Putin. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the downside wild card. I think and these are things that there's just, I'm not seeing a lot of consideration being given in sort of the soundbite media.
The best case scenario is stagflation, meaning high inflation combined with an economic decline. Russia's oil is leverage in this equation. What happens if Russia counteracts the U.S. sanctions by saying oil can only be bought with gold or rubles? As I mentioned earlier, energy was deliberately omitted from the sanctions because it's systemically important. Russia pricing their oil in gold or rubles would put pressure on the dollar and make the ruble stronger or gold stronger. Now, Russia has a war chest of gold, of $630 billion worth of gold. Russia stores this gold in Moscow at their own central bank, with approximately 13.8% of Russia's gold reserves are held in China, and roughly the same share of assets held in Chinese yuan.
We don't really know what the impacts are going to be. We don't know the full dispensation of the foreign exchange reserves. We don't exactly know how Russia is going to react. And so we're gambling against the clock. This is setting up a financial clock against a military clock. Think about this. We're trying to essentially remove the ability to finance a war before the war can be completed. And I can't think of any time that this sort of the financial levers of sanctions have been playing out in such real time, again, over days.
Economic warfare will have devastating consequences. Our Russian sanctions were the equivalent of a nuke. This has the potential to send society back to the Middle Ages. Even if there were no retaliation, Russia can't pay off its debts if their assets are frozen. And one man's debts is another man's assets. So if they have their central bank balance sheet frozen, they can't pay their bills. Jim Rickard's scenario was a simulation he presented to intelligence agencies in the Pentagon. Is it insane to think that everyone knows exactly what is at stake? Is it insane to believe that they have a solution for the next reserve asset? Crypto digital currencies can allow the rules to be programmed into the protocol where no participant can gain control of the network. This technology is capable of democratizing, decentralizing a reserve asset and protocol. So why would the U.S. agree to this? We have maxed out our debt, abused sanctions, and other nations are positioned where they could strike back, economically speaking. Having another reserve currency from the strongest economy like China means the old paradigm is recreated. The IMF has the capability of bailing out the U.S. Either we have orderly move to this new system or economic warfare picks up and we move to the next system disorderly. The IMF bails out the U.S. with a new digital currency.
To say, look, the dollar is dominant now, the renminbi is getting more dominant, Should we try and use the renminbi more? Well, that could be tricky too because, when you have the competing reserve currencies, there's often turbulence with that. So maybe what we need to do is coordinate, look it together, and try and work out a virtual currency that's based on multiple big currencies so we don't have quite one dominant where one central bank, in this case the Fed, affects so much of what happens in the world.
Imagine you run a country and most of your money is in the dollar system. The U.S. just froze another country's money. Would you question if you should continue to keep your money in a system where they can just freeze it? When Canada froze people's banks accounts that donated to the truckers, Canadians removed their money from the banks. This is the same setup, however, it's at a global scale with countries instead of citizens. On December 9th, before all of this started, the IMF in 10 countries simulated a cyber attack.
Information today, the government's going to decide how to use sanctions, how to use SWIFT. I don't want to bore your users. A sanction says I cannot do business with you. A SWIFT thing says I can't use a communication to do business with you. I can still do business with you. And there are a lot of workarounds on SWIFT, so there are different tools to be used for different reasons. And the banks are talking to the government so everyone understands the issues, not because they're for or against any particular thing.
On the question
but these war doesn't always follow the path you want. Financial sanctions don't always follow the path you want, so people should be very thoughtful how they go about these things.
But the question of workarounds to SWIFT is a very important one because that seems to be a concern that if an alternative system is established and begins to get traction, that can present real risks to the sort of financial stability of the West.
Well, but remember, they can just stop us from doing it by telling us. A sanction is very targeted, very specific, very clean, and depending how you apply it, you can apply that in multiple ways that you can't get around. There's no workaround in that kind of sanction, nor should there be. I'm an American patriot, and we're going to do what the American government tells us to do. And so I think people worried, they're more worried about SWIFT about the unintended consequences. What countries you hurt, what people are going to do workarounds, how you fix that in the case you shouldn't. Remember, the government itself wants to have an open conduit, it looks like, for energy payments. So there are a whole bunch of issues they got to work through.
Think about this. SWIFT is banned, but the sanctions have loopholes for energy and derivatives. Are U.S. banks faxing Russian banks payment instructions for energy? Or are they utilizing distributed ledgers to send payment instructions to Russia?
Inexorably, yes. I mean, that's the plan. It's been the plan since 1913 with the creation of the Fed, and it was manifested in Bretton Woods in 1944, and it is the plan. I mean, the plan is to weaponize the financial system for our benefit. It's why we cut the deal in 74 with Saudi and said, yeah, we'll protect you. Yep, here's the deal. You price all oil transactions globally in dollars, and we'll protect you. No matter what you do to us, we'll protect you. And that has been going on for decades. And anyone who's threatened that hegemony disappeared. Saddam Hussein said, I'm going to price oil in euros. Gone. Gaddafi, I'm going to do it in gold. Gone. Russia says we're going to price in rubles. Oh, you have nukes. China, I'm going to price in renminbi. Oh, you have nukes. So it works up until the point that your adversary has nuclear weapons. Then you can't take them out. And so we have to try what we're trying right now, which is, and we've tried this twice before, right? People think this is the first time we've tried to neutralize Russia. Russian stock market's been down 95% 3 times in my career, which is, I'm old, but I'm not that old.
On February 6th, prior to Europe sanctioning Russia, Russia and China set up a 30-year gas deal to settle in euros. I believe sanctioning Russia and China would lead to all-out economic war. The dollar's hegemony is sacrificed for peace. Decentralized technologies are an olive branch.
A small hedge fund could go to COMEX and say, I want to take all of it and break the market. The fact that they don't, there's an extraordinary informational value that most people just ignore. The fact that some small hedge fund hasn't gone and created a short squeeze like they did in AMC or like GameStop last year, right? Why not? The why not is because you get talked to by someone who has haircuts like ours. And they're like, you don't understand. That's not going to happen. We're going to cash settle you and you will be persona non grata, best case. And that's just, again, this is statecraft. Gold is not just some free market. It is a political metal. And so now, if you're going to do that, if you're going to do the Hunt brothers short squeeze, right? I'm not speculating. The Hunt brothers tried this in silver in 1980. The system has to protect itself. The Hunt brothers were not a sovereign. The Hunt brothers were not the biggest oil exporter in the world, like Russia is. The Hunt brothers did not have nuclear weapons. The Hunt brothers did not have an army. The Hunt brothers were not closely allied with China, who's the world, so on and so forth, right? It's a very different game at that level. And that's why I say people underappreciate the leverage that the energy that Russia has as their real currency could be. But what if Russia comes out and just says, listen, we and China have agreed that to get around sanctions, we are going to transact in we're gonna settle gold or oil, in physical gold at a new ratio of 1,000 barrels per ounce of gold. And everyone is going to go, oh my God, this is a great arbitrage, right? I'm going to go buy 1,000 ounces of COMEX gold or GLD, and then I'm going to convert it to physical. And then I'm going to take the physical over to Russia, and I'm going to get 1,000 barrels of oil, and then I'm going to sell the oil, and I'm going to get rich. And the market probably is going to shut down. It's going to crash instantly. The paper gold markets will just go, boop, cash settle everybody, game over.
Right.
And then you're going to, the oil, the real value is going to reprice gold. Again, I'm not saying that will happen. I think that's a long shot. If I was Putin and if I was pushed that far, that's what I would do. Because again, he already has the gold. Great. He's going to write up the value. People keep saying he's going to sell his gold. He might sell some gold. I don't know. But I don't think he will. Why sell your gold when you have the oil? You can use the oil to revalue the gold to give you all the dollars you need. Right? So, maybe they end up sanctioning gold. That's very possible. He does this and they say, okay, gold, you're a terrorist if you own gold, right? Justin Trudeau, cancel everybody's gold, right? If you're a gold in Canada, you've got to give it up immediately. It's possible. Like that's suddenly on the table after the last 2 weeks, right? Not just what we've seen Russian sanctions, but we've seen, in Canada. But that's why I say it's the weak link is it's so levered and there's so little physical gold there. It would take so little money. It's just nobody can do it unless, it's an act of warfare. It's an act of political warfare. Now, Putin invaded, act of warfare. The West just shut down his FX reserves, act of warfare. What's the escalation? Could that be?
We are in unprecedented times. The global economy is fragile. The next financial crisis will eclipse the Great Depression by exponents. This is why I invest in silver and gold and stockpile food. I know this could be a reality. I know we are going to reset to digital currencies, however, we don't know how long it will take to get from A to B. To myself, I am only a child playing on the beach, while vast oceans of truth lie undiscovered before me. Isaac Newton. Thanks everyone. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon. My Patreon offers weekly Zoom discussions, Discord, early videos, and almost daily information on crypto.